From the very first moment the Guthrie family realized something was wrong, the tension at the suburban Arizona home was palpable. A quiet dread settling over the property as if the walls themselves sensed the absence of Nancy. And within hours, law enforcement descended, not in dramatic chaos, but in a meticulously coordinated operation that balanced urgency with precision. Officers moving with a practiced rhythm that communicated control and care, aware that every second counted for an 84-year-old woman who might need medication, that every overlooked clue could mean the difference between hope and tragedy. And as the FBI released surveillance footage showing a masked individual near the porch, the visual evidence immediately reframed the narrative, transforming abstract concern into an urgent puzzle demanding rapid yet careful analysis. Each frame of that footage was dissected by investigators who measured gait, angle, timing, and behavioral cues, noting subtle anomalies that might suggest familiarity with the property or intent to evade cameras. And analysts immediately began mapping potential paths, cross-referencing with known neighbors, local streets, and surrounding topography, while simultaneously verifying every tip pouring into hotlines from concerned citizens, some reporting benign observations, others claiming startling insight. And the challenge became not only to sort fact from speculation, but to ensure that no lead, however minor, was dismissed in the first hours when the investigation's trajectory was most malleable. The community's anxiety only intensified as news outlets and social media amplified the story, showing that the public's eyes were now part of the broader investigative ecosystem, and with every mention of the missing matriarch, the pressure on detectives increased, not as a distraction, but as a reminder that transparency and accuracy must coexist, because missteps in either could compromise evidence or the integrity of the case. And this delicate balance informed every decision at the scene, from the deployment of specialized teams to the cautious handling of potential forensic traces, whether fingerprints, fibers, or footprints that might reveal subtle but critical details. Each new tip prompted rapid evaluation. Was it credible, actionable, or merely noise? Analysts and field officers worked in tandem, discussing likelihoods, testing theories, and ensuring that the house itself, once a private sanctuary, was carefully cataloged, with every entry point, every object of interest, and even areas overlooked in initial searches now treated as potentially pivotal. As the day wore on, the strategy became clear. Containment and methodical documentation were paramount. Forensic tents were erected to shield delicate areas from contamination, ensuring that environmental variables like sunlight, wind, or curious onlookers did not compromise traces that could later link a person, object, or movement to the disappearance. These tents, though simple in appearance, served as controlled microcosms for what investigators called reconstruction zones, spaces where evidence could be examined under ideal conditions, cross-checked against video footage, analyzed for timing, and compared against prior search data from surrounding areas, because the slightest discrepancy in pattern or placement could alter the sequence of events that investigators were painstakingly piecing together. The visual of a white forensic tent may look symbolic to the public, but in operational terms, it was nothing less than a laboratory in the field, and every detail captured inside it could yield actionable intelligence. Meanwhile, digital evidence was being analyzed at remote command centers, with devices, phone records, and surveillance feeds converging into a single analytical framework, allowing investigators to test hypotheses in real time. Analysts cross-reference movements, timestamps, and metadata, looking for consistency or contradiction in patterns that could confirm or eliminate potential sequences of events. Each discovery, whether a subtle change in lighting on a porch, a motion sensor trigger, or a slight anomaly in neighborhood surveillance, was treated as a puzzle piece, with teams rigorously evaluating its relevance. The pressure of urgency met the necessity for accuracy, because any misinterpretation could send resources down unproductive paths, delaying resolution and extending family suffering. The human element, however, remained central to the story. Savannah Guthrie's public statements were measured but powerful, conveying both vulnerability and resolve. And her appeals for information reflected the deep emotional stakes of a case that extended far beyond evidence and procedure. Investigators were acutely aware of the family's perspective, balancing operational security with the public's right to updates, crafting statements that reassured without compromising the work underway. The interplay between official messaging and media coverage added layers of complexity, as every word, image, and clip could shape public perception, potentially affecting witness behavior and the flow of new tips. Each day of the search brought iterative reassessment, a cycle of collection, analysis, and strategic decision-making that underscored the investigation's meticulous nature. law enforcement teams coordinated with federal, state, and local entities, ensuring all jurisdictional considerations were respected while maintaining a unified operational approach. The integration of forensic science, behavioral analysis, digital tracking, and community outreach represented a comprehensive strategy aimed at reconstructing events and identifying viable leads in a case defined by uncertainty. The house, the porch, the white tents, and the surrounding neighborhood became a living map of possibilities, a structured arena where every detail mattered. By evening, the rhythm of investigation revealed a broader truth. High-stakes cases like Nancy Guthrie's unfold less like dramatic headlines and more like carefully orchestrated sequences of disciplined work, where progress is often invisible to the public eye, but measurable in the accumulation of verified evidence, cross-checked leads, and corroborated testimonies. In this delicate interplay of procedure, patience, and analysis, the tension is both tangible and strategic. A reminder that while the world watches, investigators move deliberately, ensuring that each step is both safe and decisive, and that every action contributes to the ultimate goal, finding Nancy and understanding the truth behind her disappearance, no matter how long it takes or how complex the path may become. As the second day unfolded, investigators returned to Nancy Guthrie's property with renewed focus, aware that the initial hours often yield incomplete pictures and that methodical repetition can reveal overlooked detail, and under the bright morning sun, every movement beneath the white forensic tent took on a heightened significance, with gloves, measurement tools, and evidence markers meticulously placed to capture even the smallest trace that could later confirm the timeline. And in doing so, the team demonstrated a fundamental principle of investigative work. Patience is not hesitation, and thoroughness is not delay. It is the very foundation of certainty in cases where assumptions can mislead and speculation can obscure, because every fiber, fingerprint, and footprint could hold a story waiting to be decoded. Digital analysts continued their simultaneous deep dive, reviewing neighborhood camera feeds, cross-referencing timestamps, and tracking patterns that might indicate suspicious movement. And as layers of data converged, investigators began building a dynamic map of the morning of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, noting sequences, anomalies, and potential routes of approach or exit that had previously been only partially understood. And in this process, minor discrepancies that might have seemed irrelevant on day one were reevaluated for significance, because in complex cases, the difference between a critical lead and a dead end can hinge on subtle timing, positioning, or interaction with environmental factors. The tension between public observation and operational confidentiality became evident as curious neighbors and reporters gathered at a respectful distance, lenses and binoculars trained on the tents and driveway, capturing images that would circulate widely, yet investigators maintained disciplined control, restricting access while ensuring safety and evidence integrity, a dual responsibility that often goes unnoticed by casual observers, but which defines the difference between controlled forensic work and chaotic speculation. And the visual presence of the white tent, now almost iconic in media coverage, served as a silent communicator. This is an active, deliberate, ongoing process, even when the public cannot see the meticulous work being performed beneath the canvas walls. Meanwhile, the family's involvement in messaging continued to influence both public perception and investigative strategy, as Savannah Guthrie's appeals were carefully worded to encourage tips, convey urgency, and maintain dignity. And each statement was analyzed by media, investigators, and behavioral experts alike for clues about timing, priorities, or emotional state. Because in cases of missing persons, family responses can sometimes reveal indirect indicators about the missing individual's routines, vulnerabilities, or the perceived immediacy of risk, and understanding these human dimensions is as critical to the holistic investigation as forensic evidence, establishing a bridge between analytical rigor and the empathetic context necessary for interpreting events. The integration of multiple investigative streams, field searches, forensic analysis, digital monitoring, and tip evaluation created a complex operational rhythm where teams would rotate, data would be processed, and theories continuously tested against tangible findings. And within this controlled ecosystem, the white tent emerged not merely as a physical structure, but as a symbolic nexus where diverse strands of investigation converged, illustrating a central truth. Effective investigation is a fusion of discipline, observation, analysis, and human judgment. And the visual narrative presented to the public through cameras or news feeds captures only a fraction of the layered, iterative effort occurring behind the scenes. Subtle details noticed on this second day hinted at potential movement patterns around the property, with investigators noting minor environmental disturbances that could correlate with digital timestamps. And each observation was meticulously documented, photographed, and cross-checked against both physical and digital evidence, forming a chain of inference that would later be critical in constructing a validated sequence of events. Because in missing person investigations, chronology is everything. Establishing who, what, where, and when allows investigators to narrow focus, eliminate red herrings, and allocate resources with maximum efficiency. And in high-profile cases like Nancy Guthrie's, these processes must also anticipate media scrutiny and public speculation without compromising integrity. By evening, the rhythm of work beneath the white tent, the precision of digital cross-referencing, and the strategic coordination among local, state, and federal personnel converged into a tableau of disciplined pursuit, revealing an underlying principle of serious investigation. Visibility does not equal discovery, but it does signal accountability and persistence. And while the world watches through live feeds, photographs, and news cycles, the methodical work, gloves on, pens marking details, cameras capturing angles, analysts comparing notes, continues steadily, quietly building a structured understanding of events, narrowing hypotheses, and preparing for the inevitable moment when a new breakthrough, however incremental, provides the critical clarity necessary to advance the case toward resolution. And perhaps the most compelling insight of all is the human endurance behind the operation. Investigators, analysts, and coordinators working in tandem, managing complexity, uncertainty, and emotional weight with the knowledge that each hour of deliberate work is an investment in potential answers. A testament to the rigor of method over spectacle, and a reminder to the public that while dramatic headlines and viral images draw attention, true progress in cases like Nancy Guthrie's depends on patience, discipline, and unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth step by step, detail by detail, until clarity emerges from the shadows of uncertainty. The third day at Nancy Guthrie's home unfolded with a heightened sense of scrutiny as law enforcement intensified their methodical approach, each investigator acutely aware that patterns unnoticed in the first sweep could now reveal critical links. And as the morning light illuminated the driveway and surrounding areas, small but telling traces, a displaced leaf, a scuffed patch on the porch, subtle imprints in the dirt, were examined with painstaking care, for seasoned analysts know that seemingly insignificant environmental clues can corroborate or contradict witness accounts, surveillance footage, and digital evidence, forming a delicate web of inference that ultimately drives operational decisions and prioritizes investigative leads. Meanwhile, the white forensic tent became more than just a protective cover. It became a stage for meticulous reconstruction, where experts recreated potential sequences of movement, photographed, measured, and documented every angle, and behavioral analysts monitored posture, reach, and approach trajectories, recognizing that microexpressions or object displacement could yield insight into intent, timing, or familiarity with the property. And in this careful choreography, every action was calibrated to preserve both physical evidence and the credibility of subsequent interpretation, understanding that a single oversight could ripple across investigative hypotheses. Simultaneously, intelligence units reviewed digital feeds, metadata, and geolocation trails mapping every possible interaction in the hours preceding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. While tip lines flooded with accounts from neighbors, delivery personnel, and observant passersby, all requiring triage, verification, and contextual integration, and the interplay of these streams of information demanded a level of operational discipline where analysts cross-checked each input against established facts, discarding noise while retaining anything that could recalibrate the evolving understanding of events. And this ongoing synthesis illustrated the layered complexity of modern investigations, where forensic, digital, and human intelligence converge to form actionable insight. Family communication continued to influence both public perception and investigative tempo, as Savannah Guthrie's statements conveyed urgency and empathy, encouraging the community to contribute relevant information while maintaining composure. And investigators carefully calibrated their media releases to reinforce public engagement without compromising evidence integrity, knowing that premature disclosure could impact witness behavior, tip quality, or forensic control. And in high-profile cases such as this, the balance between transparency and operational discretion is a continuous, delicate negotiation. Across the property, small but telling adjustments in the scene suggested careful planning by investigators, with evidence markers meticulously aligned and photographic documentation capturing every conceivable perspective, and each measurement, angle, and annotation was subjected to cross-validation, ensuring that no assumptions contaminated the chain of inference, because the integrity of reconstructed sequences depends entirely on the reliability of data collection. And in the high-stakes environment of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, precision is as essential as urgency, reinforcing that methodical, disciplined process underpins progress more than public spectacle ever could. Public attention remained intense, with social media amplifying images of the white tent and the arrival of specialized teams. Yet the operational tempo remained internally focused and controlled, reminding all observers that visible action is often the tip of an iceberg of invisible analytic work, and the careful rhythm of gloves handling evidence, notes being cross-checked, and sequences being reviewed is what ultimately advances understanding in a case defined by uncertainty, illustrating that disciplined methodology, rather than dramatics, is the engine driving potential breakthroughs in missing person investigations. As evening approached, the convergence of physical evidence, digital analysis, and behavioral insight began to form a tentative but coherent narrative of Nancy Guthrie's last known movements. And while investigators withheld conclusions pending verification, the deliberate pace of the work created an evolving structure of understanding where each small detail, each carefully documented observation, added to the emergent picture, and the persistent presence of the forensic tent served as a visible symbol of ongoing dedication, methodical pursuit, and commitment to uncovering the truth step by step in a case that remains both urgent and profoundly complex. As the fourth day of the Nancy Guthrie investigation unfolded, the intensity of coordination between federal, state, and local authorities reached a new level, with specialized teams arriving to re-examine areas previously swept for evidence, and every movement was calculated to maximize the recovery of critical clues while minimizing contamination. For in high-profile missing person cases, even a single misstep can compromise timelines, evidentiary integrity, or investigative leverage, and law enforcement officers were acutely aware that precision under pressure was non-negotiable, a lesson underscored by the stakes of both public expectation and the potential for life-saving discoveries. The white forensic tent stood at the center of activity, a controlled microcosm of methodical scrutiny where every object, surface, and environmental trace was cataloged, photographed, and analyzed with an obsessive attention to detail. And experts in forensic science and behavioral analysis worked side by side, considering the interplay of movement patterns, object placement, and the minutiae of spatial arrangement, recognizing that each piece of evidence, no matter how small, could unlock critical understanding about the events leading to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Because in these moments, details that appear insignificant to casual observers often contain the clues essential to reconstructing the narrative of what truly transpired. Meanwhile, the digital and analytical teams were tirelessly reviewing hours of surveillance footage, cross-referencing timestamps, and isolating anomalies, while metadata experts scrutinized social media activity, local traffic cams, and geolocation data, creating a dense web of verified information that could be layered against physical evidence to identify patterns or discrepancies. And each insight, once confirmed, was fed into the central command structure, allowing on-site teams to recalibrate search areas, refine hypotheses, and prioritize investigative resources in real time, illustrating the modern fusion of technology and traditional investigation in cases demanding speed without compromising accuracy. At the same time, Savannah Guthrie's public appeals continued to resonate across media platforms, her carefully chosen words conveying both urgency and empathy, encouraging community cooperation while emphasizing factual reporting and tip submission. And investigators monitored these statements closely, understanding that family messaging can influence witness behavior, prompt new leads, and shape the flow of information. And by coordinating public communication with operational strategy, law enforcement ensured that outreach remained a productive tool rather than a source of distraction, enhancing the likelihood of credible information surfacing while maintaining focus on evidence collection. Throughout the day, subtle shifts in investigative focus became evident, with attention turning to previously overlooked areas around the property perimeter, including side yards, back entrances, and adjacent spaces, each carefully measured, photographed, and compared against earlier sweeps. And analysts examined the spatial relationships, environmental conditions, and possible points of access or concealment, because missing person cases often hinge on the ability to integrate minor deviations into a broader, coherent understanding of movement, intent, and opportunity. And in doing so, investigators leveraged both human intuition and structured methodology to minimize the possibility of critical oversight. The presence of media and curious observers added an additional layer of complexity, necessitating a balance between operational visibility and confidentiality, as cameras captured every movement beneath the white tent, generating public interest that could translate into useful tips, but also carried the risk of contaminating the perception of the investigation. And officers maintained strict control of the scene, using barriers, controlled access, and coordinated documentation to ensure that evidence remained uncompromised and that the investigation's integrity was preserved despite the intensity of scrutiny from journalists, neighbors, and online communities tracking every update. By nightfall, the day's meticulous efforts began to coalesce into a more structured understanding of the property's significance and the potential sequences of events that morning. And while definitive conclusions remained pending verification, investigators now had a richer, more interconnected set of observations, measurements, and analyses, allowing them to refine their approach for subsequent sweeps and searches. And as the white tent was temporarily dismantled for the evening, it symbolized not the end of action, but the careful, ongoing rhythm of investigation, a commitment to patience, precision, and the relentless pursuit of truth in a case that continues to challenge both investigators and the public alike. The fifth day at Nancy Guthrie's residence introduced an increased focus on environmental reconstruction as investigators meticulously reviewed the layout of the home, the surrounding yard, and access points, considering how subtle variations in terrain, vegetation, or lighting could influence both observed behavior and potential pathways. And every detail was recorded with high-resolution photography, laser measurement tools, and careful sketching, because understanding the physical environment in minute detail allows law enforcement to reconstruct events accurately, predict possible movements, and identify anomalies that could lead to critical breakthroughs in a case defined by its complexity and the unknown variables surrounding her disappearance. Forensic specialists continued their systematic examination, handling objects and surfaces with precision gloves and sterile techniques to prevent contamination, while documenting microscopic evidence such as fingerprints, fibers, and residues, knowing that even seemingly minor traces could corroborate surveillance footage, witness statements, or other data points. And each piece of evidence was cross-referenced with earlier sweeps, ensuring that nothing was overlooked and that patterns emerging from multiple sources could be integrated into a cohesive timeline, a process that highlights how patience and meticulous attention to detail often create the breakthroughs that dramatic headlines rarely capture. Simultaneously, analysts working with digital intelligence traced potential communications, geolocation signals, and online activity that could provide indirect insights into Nancy Guthrie's movements or interactions prior to her disappearance. And by layering this information against physical observations, they sought patterns of behavior, anomalies, or consistencies that might narrow down the time frame and identify potential leads, demonstrating the modern investigative approach where traditional fieldwork and digital forensics intersect to form a comprehensive understanding of events, and where each small correlation can dramatically reshape priorities and resource allocation. Meanwhile, the public's fascination with the white tent setup grew, fueled by images and commentary circulating online. And while this attention brought tips and increased awareness, investigators remained focused on controlling both access and narrative, ensuring that speculation did not compromise operations, because maintaining the integrity of a controlled scene is just as critical as uncovering new evidence. And in high-profile cases, balancing transparency with operational security is an essential, ongoing negotiation that requires constant vigilance and deliberate action. Behavioral analysts on site observed not only environmental cues, but also patterns in how team members, witnesses, and family representatives reacted to information and instructions, recognizing that human responses, body language, decision-making under pressure, and subtle interactions can provide indirect yet valuable insight into events, timelines, and potential motivations. And by integrating these observations with tangible evidence, investigators began constructing a multi-dimensional model of the circumstances surrounding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, one that accounted for both objective data and human factors, creating a nuanced, dynamic framework for understanding what had transpired. In parallel, coordination with other law enforcement agencies facilitated broader regional searches, with teams cross-checking data, validating leads, and expanding the investigative perimeter as new information emerged, ensuring that every plausible avenue was explored systematically and that nothing within the scope of possibility was ignored, because in missing person investigations, exhaustive coverage, both physical and analytical, is often the difference between delayed resolution and timely intervention, and in a high-stakes, emotionally charged case like this, diligence, coordination, and analytical rigor are essential to progress. As the day concluded, investigators compiled their findings into a detailed situational brief outlining verified observations, hypotheses, and planned next steps, and the white forensic tent, now dismantled for temporary storage, stood as a symbol of the careful rhythm of the operation, a visual reminder that behind every headline and viral image lies a structured, disciplined process in which evidence is collected, analyzed, and integrated, and that the ultimate objective, understanding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, depends not on spectacle, but on meticulous work, patience, and relentless pursuit of truth, each step building on the last toward the eventual resolution of a deeply concerning and complex case.